During the height of World War II, a lot of the public's focus shifted onto Germany, and even to this day is more spoken about in history due to its problematic events. But what if I told you that during all of this, on the other side of the globe in Japan, some of the most disgusting and downright inhumane experiments were being conducted on real human test subjects? This video is probably not going to get monetized because the nature of these tests is truly some of the most f***ed up that I have ever seen. Today, lady and man, we are taking a deep dive into the horrific experiments conducted by Unit 731 and the disturbing involvement by the United States government.
The experiment was conducted on a living Chinese woman who was infected with
and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
I participated in the vivisections. I did them every day. I cannot remember the number of people we dissected. At first, I refused to do it, but then they wouldn't allow me to eat. It was an order.
That our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger.
Because she was alive. The blood poured out just like water from a tap.
To understand why Unit 731 came to be, we need to look at Japan in the early 20th century, a period marked by rapid change, ambition, and a rising military presence. Japan's leaders were determined to build an empire that could rival the West, and to do that, they believed that they needed to control vast resources and territories. So this led to Japan aggressively expanding, eventually taking control of Manchuria, a resource-rich region in China. By the 1930s, Japan was deeply entrenched in China, and the tensions were at an all-time high. The Second Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1937, and it's in this context that Japan started to explore biological and chemical warfare, seeing it as a powerful weapon that could tilt the war in their favor. Because from everything we ever learnt as humans, chemical warfare could never go wrong. Never. Not in a million years. In 1936, General Shiro Ishii proposed creating a dedicated unit to studying biological warfare. Ishii believed that diseases could become the new frontier in war, one that could decimate enemy populations without risking Japan's army. He argued that a biological weapon could give Japan an advantage, allowing them to wage wars in ways that nobody was prepared for. So, as any normal, sane people would do, the Imperial Japanese Army approved Ishii's plan and Unit 731 was born, established in a secluded area of Manchuria, far from the eyes of the international community. Unit 731 was positioned to conduct experiments and create weapons that could target entire populations. With Japan's full support, and not to mention the massively staggering budget, Ishii set up the unit. It was hidden from the public and surrounded by a veil of secrecy. I wonder why. The Japanese government didn't want the world, or even Japan, to know what was happening here. So, officially, Unit 731 was actually labelled as Prevention and Water Purification Department. But the problem was, Unit 731's purpose wasn't to prevent epidemics, it was to create them. So when we say Unit 731, what exactly is that? Picture a large compound spanning over 6 square kilometers, filled with laboratories, prisons, and testing facilities. It even had an airfield, allowing for easy transportation of goods and personnel, and human guinea pigs. This wasn't just some rinky-dink, makeshift, run-of-the-mill laboratory. It was massive. It was a state-sponsored facility with the latest equipment built to conduct large-scale human experimentation. And Unit 731 wasn't just one unit, it was a network. Beyond its main facility in Pingfang, there were multiple smaller units spread across China, each of them dedicated to different types of research. The satellite units worked on projects ranging from chemical weapon development to human testing on plagues and anthrax. And at the helm of this operation was General Shiro Ishii. Ishii was already a trained physician. He saw his role not as a healer, but as a scientist pushing the bounds of biological warfare. Ishii's pure obsession with scientific progress led him to rationalize the atrocities that would take place inside Unit 731's walls. The majority of victims were Chinese civilians, captured by the Japanese military. But the test subjects, as they were coldly referred to, also included Russians, Koreans, Mongolians, and even captured Allied soldiers. And in the eyes of Unit 731's leaders, these people were no longer individuals with names and families. They were referred to as logs, dehumanized objects to be experimented on. Unit 731's work was so secretive that even in the Japanese military, only a select handful of people knew what was actually going on. The experiments conducted at Unit 731 were some of the most horrifying acts in humanity in modern history. These experiments were divided into several categories, each with the same objective: to understand the human body's limit and to weaponize disease. With one of the main focuses being disease, prisoners were intentionally infected with deadly bacteria such as the plague, anthrax, and cholera. These pathogens were chosen due to their ability to spread rapidly, causing widespread illness and death. And the goal was simply just to see how long it would take for someone to get infected and die. But that is far from the worst of it. In one experiment, prisoners were exposed to the bubonic plague, and once they were infected, doctors would document their symptoms and progression, and then they would dissect them alive just to observe the disease's effect on living organs. And this wasn't done with any anesthetic or pain relief, just raw observation, often leading to unspeakable agony. And then there were vivisections, surgical operations on people without anesthesia. These were commonly performed. Victims would be cut open to allow doctors to inspect their organs in real time. And the f***ed thing about this is this wasn't done for treatment. This was done purely for study. It has gone on record that a lot of the experiments happening at Unit 731 were simply for scientific curiosity, meaning there was no goal to these experiments. Prisoners would be operated on multiple times until they inevitably died. And then there were the controlled experiments, where prisoners had organs removed or limbs amputated, and then they would reconnect them to a different person, just to see what happens. I'm not even kidding. So then Unit 731 thought, we've already tried amputation, we've already tried bubonic plague, how can we get more f***ed up? Well, then they started experimenting with frostbite. Prisoners were forced to stand outside completely naked in sub-zero temperatures until they inevitably got frostbite. And then they would test different methods on how to treat frostbite, often by pouring boiling hot water over the limbs or by heating them over open flames. These weren't attempts to cure them. These experiments were just designed to show how far the body could go before it breaks. Prisoners were also placed in pressure chambers that simulated various altitudes. Pressure would be gradually increased or decreased, causing excruciating pain as blood vessels burst, ears bled, and lungs collapsed. These experiments were only halted after death, or near death in some cases. But these are the most commonly spoken about experiments. Some of the more swept under the rug experiments, the ones that were done purely out of curiosity, are even more f***ed up than you could even imagine. There was a man who was vertically cut in 2 pieces and pickled in a jar of formaldehyde. There were prisoners crushed with heavy objects for the sake of being crushed with heavy objects. Some prisoners were injected with animal blood, injected with seawater, or just completely drained of blood so they could experiment how blood loss worked. I'm not going to go through all the experiments in detail, because we need to reach the inevitable end of Unit 731, and the weird tie that the United States government actually has to this program. Because believe it or not, the US government wasn't always the good guy. But for those of you curious, here is a list of experiments. You guys can choose to read through them, or choose to keep watching the video. Maybe subscribe while you're there, please. These examples are just a fraction of the horrific events that unfolded in Unit 731. People of these experiments were stripped of their humanity, treated not as people, but as objects, in a twisted scientific pursuit. Yet for those working in Unit 731, they always found a way to try and rationalize what they were doing. They believed that the pursuit of scientific progress justified the lives lost. So after World War II ended, you'd probably think that the people behind Unit 731 would be held accountable for their horrific crimes, especially considering that at the end apparently 580,000 people lost their lives. However, the post-war period took an unexpected turn. The United States, now embroiled in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, actually had an interest in the data that Unit 731 had collected. They saw value in that biological warfare research. So, the United States, being the big old superpower it is, actually gave immunity to the people behind Unit 731, even offering General Ishii protection, sparing them from the war crime trials, all so they could get the research. Like, share, comment, subscribe.